I was pruning the marigolds by the front window when Julian's car pulled into the driveway, sleek silver, always spotless. It had been months since he visited. Long enough that I no longer reached for explanations. I simply wiped the sweat from my brow and watched the scene unfold like a play I'd seen too many times. He stepped out first, adjusting his cufflinks before smoothing the lapel of his tailored jacket. Sierra followed, sharp heels clicking on concrete blonde hair swept into a glossy twist. She held a leather folder under her arm and the kind of smile that meant she was here for business, not tea. The doorbell rang twice. No pause, no warmth. I took my time answering. "Hi, Mom," Julian said, brushing past me without eye contact. "We need a few minutes." Sierra followed her perfume, rushing in before her. "Good afternoon, Mira," she said, with her practiced kindness. "I hope you're well." I didn't bother responding. They were already halfway to the living room. I poured them coffee from the pot I'd brewed that morning, still warm enough. Julian didn't take his. He stood in the center of the room where he once took his first steps, arms crossed, like he was waiting for me to break. Sierra placed the folder gently on the coffee table, her voice clipped and professional. "There's been a development." I sat in the armchair Harold and I had picked out 37 years ago. I folded my hands, nodded. "Go on." Julian didn't wait. "The company is sold. Callahan Textiles. It's done." The silence was sudden and thick. I blinked once. "Excuse me." Sierra flipped the folder open, sliding a stack of documents forward. "Finalized yesterday. You'll see everything's above board." Julian handled the sale. "You're still listed as a shareholder, so we need your signature to make it official for the transfer of remaining authority." I looked at the pages, but not to read. Just to see the betrayal written in ink. Julian moved closer, voice sharp. "You haven't been active since Dad died. It was time." The buyer offered above market. "You'll be comfortable. You made this decision without me. You weren't involved anymore," he said, shrugging. "You've been struggling to keep up. You're not exactly contributing." Sierra offered her signature smile. "This frees you from the burden of responsibility, Mira. You can enjoy your garden. Maybe travel a bit. Paris is lovely this time of year." Julian's eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, I saw the boy he used to be. Then it was gone. "You're just a parasite now," he said. "I sold Dad's company. Good luck paying rent." I felt something inside me lurch, but I didn't let it show. I smiled. "All right," I said softly. Standing up. "Good luck." He blinked, unsure. I picked up the pen, signed where Sierra pointed, and handed it back without a word. As they gathered their things, Sierra mentioned the suite they'd booked in Paris. Julian muttered something about their cards being connected to the business account. I walked them to the door, watched them disappear into the afternoon light. Then I turned, crossed the room, and picked up the phone. The phone was still warm in my hand when I pressed the familiar number. It didn't matter that it was nearly dinner time. He would answer. Mira Thomas said, on the first ring, his voice steady, unhurried. "It happened." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "They came this afternoon. Signed everything like it was already done." He was quiet for a beat. Then, "And you I signed." I paused. I smiled too. "Good," he said. "We're ready." I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the garden beds Harold built in his last summer. The marigolds were blooming defiantly. The breeze was warm, but my hands felt cold. After the call ended, I made myself tea the old way, loose leaves, no rush. I sat at the table and let my mind drift backward. People always thought Harold was the business. He had the charm, the laugh, the talent for knowing the right handshake. He could walk into a boardroom and come out with 3 offers. What they didn't see was who filed the patents, who structured the subsidiaries, who met with the tax attorneys and created the shell companies that kept us protected. Me. I was never interested in attention. I was interested in security, control. I remember one night in '89, Harold was at a partner's dinner and called to ask what our Q3 projections looked like. I gave them to him by memory down to the decimal. He chuckled and said, "God, Mira, I don't know how you keep all that straight." He said it like a compliment. But when he repeated the story to his colleagues later, he turned it into a joke about his walking calculator of a wife. They laughed. I laughed too, but I never forgot. After Harold died, Julian stepped in like he'd been preparing for it all his life. At first I was relieved. I thought maybe we could run the company together, me behind the scenes, him at the front. But within 6 months, he'd moved me out of the corner office, converted it into a lounge space, and told the staff I was transitioning into a non-operational role. I didn't argue. I just moved everything that mattered into a locked cabinet in my study at home. Thomas and I started meeting monthly. We created the Callahan Trust, then the subsidiary holdings, then the IP portfolio with my name alone. 3 years. That's how long I've been pretending not to notice how Julian talked over me in meetings, how he told clients I'd been less involved since Dad passed. I let him believe I didn't understand the digital side of the business, that I was slow to adapt. I let him believe what he wanted to believe. But every deal he made, I read the fine print. Every asset he thought he controlled, he never bothered to trace its ownership beyond the front-facing corporation. I never needed revenge. I needed insurance. And now he's halfway to Paris with a fiancée who thinks she's walking into a legacy built by charm and inheritance. Let them land. Let them try the cards. Thomas had already called the bank. By morning, those accounts would be dust. The trust was locked. The company, what really mattered, was still mine. And Thomas. He'd be in Milan before breakfast. At 2:17 a.m., the phone began to ring. I was already awake. I had brewed a pot of chamomile tea and was sitting at the kitchen table, the room still and clean, waiting for the inevitable. The call display flashed Julian's name. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," he said, voice clipped, breathless. "There's a problem with the bank." I took a slow sip. "Oh, the funds," he said, his voice climbing. "From the sale. They're not in the account. We checked as soon as we landed. Our cards were declined at the hotel. They're saying the account doesn't exist." "I see," I said. "Have you called the bank?" "Of course we called the bank," he snapped. "They said the account was closed yesterday." "Closed? How does that happen?" "You didn't close it, did you? Banking's not really my department." I replied. Soft even. He exhaled hard. I could hear Sierra's voice in the background, sharper than his, pressing him. "She needs to fix this now," she hissed. Julian came back on the line. "Mom, I need you to call Thomas. Something's gone wrong with the paperwork. The money should have transferred by now." "It's nearly 3 a.m. here," I said. "I'll call him in the morning." "No, you need to call him now," he was yelling. "We're in Paris, Mom. We're supposed to be checking into the suite. Our cards don't work. The hotel wants a different form of payment. That does sound stressful." There was silence then. "Mom, please." I waited a beat before speaking again. "Julian, you sold what you thought was the whole company. What you actually sold was 30%. A name, a desk, some lease agreements, nothing more." The line was quiet completely this time. "I what?" "The assets you never asked about. I continued the patents, the manufacturing rights, the offshore contracts, the commercial real estate. Those never belonged to Harold. And they were never passed to you." "You're lying," he whispered. "Thomas should be arriving at your hotel shortly. I made sure he booked a room nearby. He'll explain everything to you in legal terms. Kindly." Sierra grabbed the phone from him. "Mira, this is absurd. Wade told me it's Julian. I don't care what his name is," she snapped. "You've stranded us here. That's illegal. We're going to sue." "With what money?" More silence. "Tell me, Sierra," I added. When you reviewed the incorporation documents, did you ever notice the absence of asset schedules like what the Meridian Trust I said? The one that holds the real value of Callahan Textiles. Did you read those filings? Or Patterson Holdings? Or the IP registry? I heard nothing but the faint hum of lobby music on their end. Then a voice. Thomas's calm, measured, unmistakable. "Ah," I said. "He's there. Let him walk you through it." Julian came back on the line, voice low. "You planned this. You planned all of this." "I prepared for it," I said. "There's a difference." I ended the call without goodbye. The tea had gone lukewarm, but I finished it anyway. Then I rose, walked through the dark house, and switched on the hallway lights. There were files to review and a brief to finalize for the German licensing renewal. I'd expected the call. I also expected the next one. The second call came 20 hours later. I was in the garden, deadheading roses. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I didn't rush to answer, Mom Julian said. His voice was low, gravelly, tired. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything. "We're coming back. Tomorrow. Evening flight. With what money I called Uncle Graham. He wired us enough for the tickets." I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. "This is still my home, Julian. I'll be here." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "We'll talk when I get in." I ended the call without ceremony. The next evening, just past 6, I heard the car pull up. I'd seen it through the kitchen blinds a minute earlier, rented smaller than his usual. I waited. Let them knock twice before I opened the door. Julian stood on the porch alone, a single suitcase in one hand. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked thinner, worn down. Sierra was nowhere in sight. "Where is she?" I asked. "She's gone. Hotel lobby in Paris. Said I was on my own." I stepped aside and let him in. "I need somewhere to stay," he said. "Just for a bit, until I figure things out." I crossed my arms. "The spare room is available. $50 a night. No exceptions." He blinked, then gave a short, bitter laugh. "You're charging me rent? I'm offering you a roof, not a reset button. And I expect help with housework. No overnight guests, no complaints." He nodded, once eyes cast down. "Okay." The days that followed were quiet, but sharp-edged. I set out a chore schedule, and he followed it without protest. Clean the windows on Monday. Sweep the back porch Tuesday. Grocery run on Thursday with a list handwritten by me. He cooked dinner twice a week. The first night, he burned the chicken and didn't look me in the eye. The second night, it was edible. I didn't ask about Sierra. He didn't offer. We moved like planets orbiting a shared silence, close enough to feel the pull, far enough not to collide. I watched him flinch each time he passed the framed photo of Harold on the hallway shelf. On Sunday, he found me on the patio, folding laundry. He stood there, awkwardly, arms loose at his sides. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the company. What I thought I knew." I said nothing, kept folding. I didn't see any of it. Not really. I thought I understood what Dad built, but it was you. It was always you. I kept folding until the last towel was stacked. Then I looked up. "And what are you going to do with that understanding I want to learn? Really learn. From the ground up. If you'll let me." I studied his face, lined, tired, less certain than I'd ever seen it. Maybe for the first time he wasn't performing anything. "I run a business," I said. "Not a school. I'm willing to work. Hard. For once." I picked up the laundry basket and walked past him toward the door. "Tomorrow morning," I said. 7 sharp. Bring coffee. Black. We'll review the Tokyo numbers together." He exhaled, the smallest thread of relief breaking through. In the hallway, he paused by Harold's photo again. "Dad always believed in you," I said, not looking back. "But he let you believe he ran the show. That was his flaw. Don't make it yours." I heard him whisper, "I won't." I didn't respond. I only kept walking past the office toward the sunroom where the quarterly reports were waiting. Julian didn't miss a single 7 a.m. start. Not even the day the pipes froze and the power flickered through breakfast. He brought coffee black, no sugar. He came with a notebook sometimes with pages already filled. I never asked him to. He just did. At first, I let him observe, sit quietly during vendor calls, review the summaries I'd already annotated. I gave him access to archived contracts and had him trace the discrepancies in old licensing deals. He spent 3 days poring over a broken distribution agreement from 2014. When he handed me his summary, I expected the usual surface notes. Instead, he'd flagged a clause that had slipped past 2 of our lawyers at the time. I didn't say anything, but I filed it away. Weeks passed. He handled more small projects at first, vendor follow-ups, translation audits on our Tokyo expansion, budget forecasting for our eco-textile line. His questions were sharper, more thoughtful, less about getting the right answer and more about understanding the terrain. By the 3rd month, I started bringing him to client meetings, just a few. I introduced him as Julian Callahan, Director of Operations. It wasn't a title I gave lightly. He didn't earn it with bloodline. He earned it with quiet work done without the assumption of reward. One morning, while reviewing a renewal contract from our German partner, I noticed he'd written 3 options in the margin. One of them mirrored what I had circled the night before. I slid the folder aside and looked up. "You're good at this," I said. He blinked, unsure if he heard me right. "You see beyond the numbers." "That's rare." He nodded slowly, not smiling, just taking it in. "Dad made it look effortless," he said. "I thought it was charisma that built everything. Charm in a boardroom, a big handshake, and a louder voice. But this work, it's quieter than I thought. It's the silence that holds it together," I said. "Your father was good at front doors. I built the foundation. He didn't speak for a while. Then he never told me that. He didn't need to. You wouldn't have listened then." He didn't argue. Later that week, I found him alone in the office reviewing archive footage of board meetings from 10 years ago. He didn't know I was watching from the hall. His eyes were locked on the screen on Harold speaking confidently, while I sat beside him, flipping through notes pointing discreetly to numbers off camera. Julian replayed the same moment twice, then 3 times. Watching his father speak, watching me calculate. The next day, he brought in the international licensing binder I hadn't asked him to read. He had 2 pages of notes. "I'd like to restructure the renewal calendar," he said. "We're locked into overlapping territories with 3 smaller players. It's inefficient." I waited for the arrogance, for the rush to impress. But it wasn't there. "Show me your breakdown," I said. He handed it over, steady. That night, while clearing the table after dinner, he paused with a plate in his hand. "I'm not sure who I was trying to become back then," he said. "But I know I didn't like him." "Then don't become him again." He nodded. "I want to keep learning. From you. If you'll keep teaching." "I already am." He started loading the dishwasher. I returned to the sunroom, opened the email from the Henderson group, and scanned their reply. They were asking for a meeting. And they wanted Julian in the room. The Henderson group signed their letter of intent 3 days after the meeting. Julian had led the presentation. I watched him from across the table, steady voice, clear numbers, no embellishments. Just competence earned the hard way. That night I typed the formal announcement for our internal team, Julian Callahan, Director of Strategic Operations. No fanfare, just truth. I found him on the back patio, his sleeves rolled, watching the dusk settle across the trees. "It's official," I said, handing him the printed memo. "Goes out to the staff tomorrow." He read it slowly, then folded it in half and placed it on the table. "Thank you." I sat beside him, pulled my phone from my pocket, and opened the folder of saved audio files. "There's something I want you to hear," I said. His jaw tightened. Now. I played the first clip. His voice recorded months before laughing with Sierra. She has no idea what she's sitting on. I'll get her to sign. She'll be grateful just to be included." He looked down, shame blooming slowly across his features. The second recording was of Harold. "Your mother could run circles around most CEOs half her age. If you can't see that you're not as sharp as I hoped." Julian flinched at that. His eyes reddened, but he didn't ask me to stop. When the third recording ended his suggestion to transition me into a symbolic advisory role, I placed the phone down between us and waited. He ran his hands through his hair, leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I said all of that," he whispered. "God. I was so sure I knew better. You weren't the first to think that I said, and you won't be the last. I thought Dad built everything. He built a name. I built what held it up. I didn't want to believe that." "I know." He looked over at me. "Why didn't you expose me back then? Why let me walk into my own failure? Because if I'd protected you from the fall, you never would have learned to stand." We sat in silence for a moment. I thought I was owed something he said, just for being born into it. Respect isn't something you inherit, Julian. It's something you earn, just like trust. He nodded slowly. Then his phone buzzed on the table. "Unknown number." He didn't answer. Later that night, my own phone rang. Sierra. I didn't hesitate. "Mira," she began, her voice small and steady. "I owe you an apology. I'm listening. I was wrong. About you. About everything. Julian and I, we were careless. Entitled. I see that now." I said nothing. I called to say I'm sorry. And to ask if he's all right. "He's here. He's rebuilding." Would he speak to me? Just once I looked across the room. Julian sat on the floor near the bookcase sorting old files. His posture wasn't rigid anymore. He looked up when I spoke his name. "It's Sierra," I said. "She's asking for you." He didn't speak right away, just held my gaze. "I'll leave it to you," I said quietly, "whether you pick up or not." I set the phone on the counter and walked away, letting him decide.